Okay. We are rolling, so we can just go into this. You know, for a very long time, you may or may not have seen the 8 stations of attention, that attention model, and I've not been convinced that we've had a useful sort of introduction to that. That the criteria, setting up the criteria, I've always found very challenging, and then, you know, sort of, and that kind of does leave a question hanging. So why? I mean, why this added complication of this? Why don't you just go to the intention stuff? And on a bike ride with Anna about 6 months ago, it suddenly occurred the key to kind of making sense out of this suddenly kind of became apparent to me. And that refers back to this issue of the window of perception, and I'd like us to draw it. So you might have to, for a moment, just stand up and kind of distribute yourself so that you can do that window of perception exercise, if you don't mind. You need to physically do it. I'll sit here so that they've got something to see on a video. But so if you take your index fingers and point them directly in front of you like this, and crook them, and bring them further and further back until your fingers are at the limit of your peripheral vision. Wiggle your fingers because you get that point. So when your hands are about to disappear, and then just draw the circle. You know how to do this. Just do it twice. So draw the boundary at the limit of your peripheral vision. Just tickle that boundary. There you go. And go back up once more. And it's just to anchor an experience that we will then keep on referring to throughout the rest of this conversation. Brilliant. Thank you. You can sit down again. So what we've got here is we've now described the kind of the fundamental binary opposite that our attention works on. This this window, if you like, is the dividing line between 2 places. You can describe these 2 places as the there of perception, and you can describe, and the opposite of that would be the here of perception. Now, we have various ways of referring to this distinction that is consistent with the there of perception and the here of perception. And each one of these ways of referring to this difference actually has quite a dramatic effect with regard to your life experience. One way of describing the difference between the there of perception and the here of perception is to refer to the distinction between the self and the other. The self is what I feel is the here of perception, and the other is the there of perception. Now, there are implications to describing the difference between the here of perception and the there of perception is consistent with the distinction between the self and the other. Because the word other is misleading. Because there's not a singularity to other. It's by definition a multiplicity. It's self and others. And as soon as you describe the here of perception as a self, therefore, and the there of perception is populated by others, what would be the implication intuitively of that difference? What do you think?
There's only one of me and there's so many of them.
That's an unnerving insight. You know?
Separate.
So I beg your pardon?
The separation.
Well, separation and threat.
Yeah.
Fundamental threat. Because it's the basic logic of the one faced by the many. You know? So there's This way of framing the distinction between the there of perception and the here of perception produces an experience of disquiet. And it's a deep disquiet, you know. Also, the self is definitely an object. It is a thing, you know. The self is, for most people, the self, if you say, what are you talking about, self? You say, myself. So, in other words, it is consistent with personhood. Now, if let's consider your personhood. If I were to ask you to describe your personhood in your terms of yourself, what would you say?
I start with my gender, I suppose.
Your?
My gender.
Your gender, that's a very good place to start. Yes, exactly.
What else?
And in fact, what else? That could be a list as long as your arm. You know, it could include your gender, it could include your race, it could include your class, it could include where you come from, it could include your age, it could include how many children you have, how many siblings you have. And every one of these things that you're describing are objects in themselves. Do you understand? So when you describe yourself as a person, you're describing yourself as one who is seen, one who has attributes, one who has all of these defining qualities, one who has all of these conditions, and therefore one that is by definition, so you're not just vulnerable on the basis of being the one confronted by the many, you are needy on the basis of the one confronting the many. Because when you describe yourself as a person, you describe yourself by a set of conditions. Those set of conditions then are consistent with your conditional motive. If you're a man, you require a woman. You know, you are pursuing. You know, if you've got children, you require to provide. There's all of this, and all of those things actually get you sucked into the outward, into the there of perception, because those aren't things that you can. Every one of those things that you require from other than you, which basically it pulls you into the there of perception, so that it becomes for you an experience of the arena of the perceived. It's an arena where you have to stand out and contend, because every part of myself is a standing out. Even my gender is a standing out. It is something that is seen. It is something that wishes to appear. You know, something that appears. You know. So when I describe the here of experience as consistent with my personhood, I'm describing something that's not only vulnerable, but something that's needy, and it's something that is contending in the arena of the perceived. So to be a person is not actually all that it's cut out to be. This is like quite a challenging prospect, to be a person among people, because you then cast yourself in the lot of being needy of other and contending with other in this arena of the perceived, of being one that wishes to be perceived, one who wishes to be seen, one whose very existence is based on what is seen. You know, all of these things that you're describing are things that are seen. Yeah. So, maybe there's another way of describing or considering the distinction between the there of perception and the here of perception. maybe we can refer to that distinction as the distinction between the seer and the seen. Now, what's interesting about this difference is that the seen has more of a unified feel to it than others. There's a feeling of a one thing that I'm looking into that is seen. What is seen here? Well, everything is seen. So there's a one thing that is seen. And it's also one thing that is doing the seeing. It's still a thing, but what's very interesting about this thing is it's not the same kind of thing as a self, because a self is definitely a noun, is definitely an object. But the seer surely refers to a verb. It is the one who does the seeing, And so therefore it's not quite as solid. The seer is not quite as solid as the self. It is singular, it is not solid, and also it doesn't have any of these attributes. Any of these attributes are things that are seen. I mean, your gender, dare I say, I can visualize my gender. I can put it, it's an object to me. So anything that is seen is not the thing that is doing the seeing. Every attribute that I associate with the here of perception is in fact not the here of perception. Because the here of perception, if you think of it accurately, actually it's the place that's doing the seeing. Which means everything that I consider to be part of my personhood is something which is seen. It is an object. It is not the place, it is not the seeing. So I therefore, by conceptualizing myself or experiencing myself as a seer, it allows me to pull back from the window of perception and to disassociate the seer from all of the attributes of my personhood. It becomes apparent to me, therefore, that my personhood is like an incrustation at the border, at the limit of my peripheral vision, at the limit of my, sitting right on the window of perception, right on the edge. There's this thing which is both seen and part of the seer. It is all the things that are associated with your personhood. Everything you can say about yourself which is an object. I mean, the most basic example of this is my hand. This is my hand. Well, you can't have it, it's mine. If you put your hand next to mine, let's assume you put your hand closer to me than my hand, then I could still do this, but I could not make your finger do this, which is quite creepy because your hand's closer to me than it looks the same. So there are parts of me that are kind of connected to the here of perception, but that are also objects. So all of these things that I associate with my personhood are kind of things that intrude into the window of perception and actually present themselves to me in this peculiar interspace, that they're both things that are perceived, contending in the arena, but also things that are associated with that which is doing the seeing. So when I associate myself, let's frame this accurately. When I associate the here of perception with the one that is seeing, I take all of the things that I associate with this incrustation at the window of my perception, which is in fact the attributes of my personhood, and I turn them into objects. There are things that I can see, like I can see you, like I can see anything that isn't the seer. And it allows me, therefore, to fall back from the window of perception, fall deeper in deeper into the here of perceiving. Now, there's obviously immense freedom in that. The first thing that you are relieved from is this deep and unnerving problem of being the one faced by the many, which is the problem that you faced with when you're a self. The second thing that you're relieved from are all the conditions that you require for happiness, because it is the limitation defined by your personhood, which produces your neediness and your condition. You're liberated from that. instantly. Because you no longer, it is, I mean, it's like, if thirst was a phenomenon in your field division, like any other phenomenon, like the table, I don't have to have an opinion about this table, or in fact, respond to it at all, Which means I don't have to have an opinion about my thirst or respond to it at all. It is a phenomenon like any other phenomenon. It ceases to have its dominating effect on my consciousness. It ceases to produce the requirement to contend.
Yes.
I can now choose. I mean, that's probably one of the blessings of fasting, actually. Fasting forces you to become a seer, because otherwise you suffer the hunger and you suffer the thirst. Until you've turned the hunger and the thirst into a stimulus, equal to any other stimulus just out there, then I choose or do not choose to respond to, then that thing dominates me and forces me to contend.
So is it when you're truly exercising your free will?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You cannot have free will. Your will is compromised.
Yes.
While you are between the eyes. Your will is compromised when you're acting as a self, as a person. Because there's all of these needs, that kind of the conditioning of your motive that come up from behind. I mean, most of what you consider yourself to be, you're not even conscious of. Most of your requirements of life are things that kind of bubble up from the depths that overtake you from behind. But the more you operate as a seer, the more inwardly gathered you become, the more these things are delivered to you as objects that you can then be reasonable, have a reasoned response to. No, but I mean, just because I feel like this doesn't mean to say I have to act accordingly. Any person who's done any proper anger management has understood this. Just because I feel enraged doesn't mean to say I have to slap them. Pleasurable as that may be. Maybe you should slap them just for me. So, there's a great blessing. There's a great benefit for adapting to shifting how you experience the here of perception from being a self to being a seer. And part of that journey is to become really skeptical of your own requirements of life. Which means this is exactly why the petty tyrant is such a wonderful device. Because anybody who irritates you to distraction is saying what your requirements are. So, well, can I turn this irritation into an object, like any other object, like the table, that I can then choose to have a value judgment about? And not compelled to have a value judgment about. So, our growth is coterminous with a move from being a self to being a seer. And by being a seer, by moving from being a self to being a seer, we the benefits that come from that are, in the first instance, you are no longer contending, because you're one faced with one. You're not one faced with many. You are liberated from your own neediness, because you recognize that anything that presents itself as a need is an object like any other object that you actually have a choice about. That you may, that doesn't mean to say you don't satisfy. Occasionally it's useful to drink, I think. But that doesn't, it loses its compulsive feel about it. I think actually, I mean, sorry to say this, but I think smoking is wonderful for this. Stopping smoking is a wonderful exercise in becoming a seer. Because you look at the need for the cigarette like a stimulus, like any other stimulus. And you decide on whether this thing is going to compel you or not.
Even for me personally, it's the getting up and doing a salah sometimes, you know, and that need for sleep, especially for Fajr.
Yes.
I've got work to do. I have a long
Yeah.
I need to rest.
Yeah. All of those things are you then describing as the requirements of your personhood.
Exactly.
Yeah. This poor thing that needs its rest.
Yes, exactly.
And that's also another thing I think is true about identifying the year of perception as a person, is that you are then, by definition, casting the experience of the year of being a person in victimhood. It's all of these things you have to do. And all of these things, and it's very complex. It's in being me. And all these things I've got to manage. It's very sad.
Yes.
Now the question is there even a more profound way of conceiving of the here of perception and the there of perception? Conceiving of the distinction between what's on this side of the window of perception and what's on that side of the window of perception. And I think there is. The first thing that becomes apparent is that becoming a seer is become familiar with the sense of the cone of perception. And what I mean by the cone of perception, you might be able to do this, I don't know, just go just stick your arms out at the limit of your peripheral vision, but try not to injure somebody. If you move forward and back, do both, yeah, you do both. So just move until you get your hands at the limit of your peripheral vision. Once you're there, you can do it at the high also, it doesn't matter. Once it's at that limit, stop, hold your hands there and then look to the right and look to the left. Now, are your hands sticking out directly from your shoulders or they're slightly forward?
Forward.
They're slightly forward. That's very significant. You can stop. That's very significant because it means you're not. You see, if you think of it as flat, then the window of perception as an idiom works because it's like a pane, but it's not quite like that. It's kind of like this, which means I'm sort of looking into a funnel. So if I'm close to the window, it appears like it's flat. But when I go back, I sense, no, but there's things. This thing that is doing the seeing is a bit fluffier than just what's contained in this. There's like a funnel that I'm looking into, So, and once you get that you allow yourself just to sit and feel that for a moment. Feel that it's almost like the here of perception bleeds a little bit into the corners here. And the corners all round. They're kind of all around, even down at the bottom here. You then allow yourself to go a little bit deeper. Then you get a sense, but I can also refer to the here of perception as the inward and the there of perception as the outward. Now, how's the inward different how's conceptualizing of the here of perception as the inward different from conceptualizing the here of perception as the seer?
There's a demarcation somewhere, so there's two sides to it.
Like the inward and the outward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you raise that question again?
So, we get a sense of the distinction between how profound the shift is from experiencing the here of perception as the seer, as opposed to being this, a self. So the self, the seer is deeper. Where's the inward?
Oh,
It's deeper still.
yeah.
Not so. And it's deeper still kind of in a limitless way.
Yeah.
Because the intriguing thing about the word direction, framing, is that it's a direction. It's not a place. How far can you, if nothing ever impeded you, how far can you travel in that direction? Into perpetuity. How far can you travel in that direction? How far can you travel in that direction? So how far does it go in this direction? It has no... Whereas the seer still has some sense of there's something corporeal here. There is still one who's doing the seeing, the seer. There's like a direction has no... It is just fathomless. So cultivating the experience of the here of perception as being just the inward is now the baby shoes have come off. Now you're playing kind of grown-up stuff, you know. Because this is an even more profound. You see, there's almost like a balance when the seer and the seen. Whereas when you go into the depth of inward, of the here of perception being just this fathomlessness, and you get this sense that okay, there's this fathomlessness that's sort of looking in, and when I look, actually, it's not. This is like a cone, and the cone isn't just going this direction. Obviously, it's a cone; it goes in every direction. And there's this spaciousness, and there's what's over here, just over here, you know, just what's over here. It's actually the same spaciousness. And what's over there is the same spaciousness. And what's over here is the same spaciousness. And what's on the other side of what I'm looking at is the same spaciousness. So to allow yourself to fully sink into the profundity of your own inwardness means to have an experience that whatever you're looking at is contained in a bubble that is in the embrace of that which is doing the seeing. In other words, when you operate as a self, where's everything that isn't you? Where's the other? It's all, you know, you're encapsulated by the world. That sense of it, you're also there are many that this is a deeply threatening way of being. You know, it's big and you're small. The self is encapsulated by the totality of the other. When you're operating as an inward, the outward is encapsulated by the totality of the inward. Everything that you perceive is experienced to be inside you, contained as if it is in a bubble. That when you look at the furthest horizon, you recognize the thing that is doing the seeing is on the other side of that horizon. That is an unassailable way of being. And that is what we're trying to achieve with our path. And in each phrase of it, there's a dying, there's a giving up, there's a sacrifice. I sacrifice being a person. I sacrifice the conditionality of my personhood to operate from a place of being a seer. I sacrifice the conditionality of being a seer to operate as pure inwardness. So there are many little deaths. It's not just one fana. There's many little deaths in this process.
And I think it sort of feels like how temporary everything is. Because it is within that vision, and that vision can change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing that never goes away is this vastness that contains all that is presented in the bubble of perception.
And you have a true backing in this sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A true backing because it has no back. Nothing can get behind that which has no back. So our journey as human beings has an outward component and it has an inward component. The outward component, a newborn infant, is pure inwardness. You can see that because they can't make sense of what's being presented in the window of perception. You can run your finger across their vision and they won't trace the finger. Like soup, you know. That's very short, by the way, that period, but it's there. The first couple of weeks, they are perfectly sort of just metabolizing tissue with a sort of somewhat bemused look into the world out there. We are drawn into operating as selves. First of all, by becoming seers, because the first thing that happens to the infant is they start to recognize that there's this very peculiar interspace between the here of perception and the there of perception that is somehow connected with the here of perception. I can do things with this. I can, I've watched Hassan the other day could be completely entranced with his own foot. You know, he grabbed this thing, looked at it, bit it, sucked it, like really investigated this, and you can see that this is amazing because I can feel what's going on here. But you know, it's like that's there and that's part of here. Which this is like. So we in toddlerhood, from late infancy to toddlerhood and early childhood, we are busy discovering that we are a self. That there is something which is associated with this end of perception, which is also at that end of perception. Something that is also seen. Something that is also perceived. And then, as we go into child, we think that is this end of perception. The thing that is seen is this end of perception. I have a self. You know, insist on my dignity. I want a place in the world. I kind of like... And sort of the full-blown kind of horror show of that is adolescence. We kind of like, it's like this is completely forgotten. It's all how you appear. That's all what it's about, you know. I am what I appear to be. But then you go through, and that's very useful because that's what makes you a useful citizen, clearly. You know, why would anybody go to work, you know, if they didn't kind of make you feel that you had to? But I certainly wouldn't. That is what makes us useful to others. That kind of being defined and have been compromised, being made needy. But then you have where basically most of us are at this point in your lives, this wonderful condition called the midlife crisis, where you realize, but you know, I have been such a good person, and they've exhausted me. And I'm miserable. And I'm so unbelievably stressed, and they don't seem to care. Then we realize, hold on, this thing of being goody two-shoes is really not all it's cut out to be. Now, that doesn't mean to say we've got license now, and I'm very insistent about this, you know, because I do think people sometimes sort of deliberately mishear me. You do not have license to become goody bad shoes. Well, no. Baddie two shoes, whatever. You know what I mean? Just, you don't have the right now to go and... Well, a lot of people do. They misbehave unbelievably. Like flings, affairs, kind of, you know. That's also pleasurable for a while, but it just causes much too much trouble, and you don't have to go through life with all of that trouble. I mean, just change your criteria. Use the discomfort of being a self contending in the arena of the perceived. Because it's actually an insupportable discomfort. It's actually immense suffering. Use that suffering as an opportunity to investigate not what else is there going to make me happy, because nothing else there will make you happy. Because it's the logic that the there is what's going to make me happy, is what produces your unhappiness. Use that as the stimulus to explore the here. What's on this side of perception? What's on the here? What's the here of perception all about? So that's our midlife crisis, is then the opening of a door that invites us to start doing the journey back home. We got alienated from this as infants, and now we want to go back home. We want to go back to that spaciousness that perception lands in, which is what we truly are. And that's the journey. It's the human journey. It happens to be coterminous with the journey of Tasawwuf. I mean, that's what we're trying to achieve. But it is the deepest human story. That's the logic that makes the 8 stations now a useful piece of content. Because you can actually see how we go into exile and come back home. The steps of the journey whereby we go into exile, whereby the inward becomes a seer, becomes a self, goes back to inward, goes back to seer, goes back to inward. Your midlife crisis is the unhinging of the uncoupling of your sense of identity, of your sense of this side of perception with your personhood. That's when you start exploring what it means to be a seer. And I don't know what else to say. I think I've said it all. I took quicker than I thought.
The floor is open for questions then, Sheikh Sam.
Sorry?
The floor is open for questions then.
Yes, of course.
So when you're talking about all this, Sheikh Sam, what keeps on coming back to me is how do we sort of polish this or exercise this, and then part of it to me feels like that's where meditation comes in as well, and muraqabah, to sort of shut yourself out and then to reflect. Is that?
I think that's absolutely right. So we've got these 2 elements. We said we need to do 2 kinds of work. We need to work on intention and we need to work on attention. And working on intention is really the process of moving from being a self to being a seer. Because it's about incrementally changing your narrative about the world to reduce your neediness, because that's the effect of it.
Yes.
It is about becoming detached from your own neediness. But that then just opens an aperture, and the aperture is to become inwardly gathered. Allow yourself to sink deeper and deeper into yourself. All other practice has that effect. Your salah should have that effect. Because anything where you're deliberately doing something to do it right means you are examining the actor as the actor is acting. Which means it requires you to stand at a place removed, deeper in from the one who is acting. So things that you previously just did now are being observed. So all mindfulness practice deepens, strengthens this move into inwardness.
That's quite liberating.
I beg your pardon?
I said that's quite liberating.
And in the end, we go back to the soup. Where we
We
start.
go back to the soup. But this time we kind of know that it's soup. It is like, because the soup is also a feeling of deep connectedness with everything that is, where self and other distinction is a nonsense distinction. Another word for that experience is love, but it is the most profound love. It is love like even the mother's love for a child is but a poor metaphor for it. It is the essence where all love comes from, which and it's actually his nature, you know. But now we know that it's there. Because you don't know that it's there unless it's been removed from you. So the exile absolutely has a purpose. The journey has a purpose. And that's why it also gives one license not to want to fix everybody, because everybody's somewhere on their journey. You know, as I said with the conversation we had regarding your son, you know, this is right for him now. You know, you're in a different place as a soul, and you know, now you have to start being skeptical about being the good person. That you're, you know, an adolescent must not be skeptical of being a good person, because you've laid it on thick. You know, let them suffer. So this is part of this getting lost is by definition forgetting that we have a Rab. Because getting lost means being conditioned, means feeling needy, means feeling inadequate, means requiring myself to start doing stuff, you know, to earn my good fortune. He sent us here to this place of exile, where we will forget that we have a Rab. Why?
So we discover him.
So we can remember that we have a Rab. And that's why every time you have this insight, it's like deeply moving. To remember you have a Rab. Because this is such an awful place, this, from one point of view. It is the place of the absence of that. You know, so it has a role. He said he was a hidden treasure that wished to be known. For it to be, how can it be known if it's not, if you aren't separated from it, you know, if you aren't. So the lostness has a role. And however that lostness manifests itself, the perversity of an immensely cruel person, the insatiable greed of an arch capitalist, the kind of all the beings that we consider to be deeply despicable. What they manifest is just another variant of the same disease that you have, because it's a variant of lostness. They're the same as you. They're not different from you. But they're struggling with that problem of being the one faced with the many, having to contend in this arena of the perceived. It has gotten themselves really confused and really lost. Which means it doesn't matter how perverse somebody is in your view. The appropriate way of dealing with any human being alive. And that doesn't mean to say blessing them and allowing them to get away with murder. But the appropriate way of dealing with any human being alive is compassion. Truly, there but for the grace of God go I. He has produced all the various manifestations of lostness. All the myriad of possible ways that we can get this thing wrong for him to be discovered. He's, you know, Because clearly the way back to the oasis from the desert looks different from the north and from the south. There's a different place to be discovered. So each being has their own role in this drama, otherwise he wouldn't have made them. Which means that every human being's life story is truly significant. It is truly the purpose of all creation. It is him using that as a way to explore, to be known, for him to be known. Which means we have another way of, another benefit of the liberation of operating as an inward. You no longer have to have an opinion about anybody. I don't. That doesn't mean to say I let them get away with murder, but I can confront it and move on, and they're forgotten. Because I don't have to carry them as a judgment.
That's very freeing. Yes.
That's immensely freeing. It also addresses that question that you had about doubt. Am I right? Am I wrong? Well, actually, my confusion is his product. That's the particular flavor of this place of exile, and he'll let you out of the cage when it's ready, and you will see that it is that attribute of your exile become apparent to you when it becomes necessary.
So you're removing judgment for yourself and for others.
Exactly. And replacing it with compassion.
And it's interesting because that compassion and that freeing of the judgment gives you the courage as well at the same time.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
Exactly, because you know now, you're not doing this to demean. Yes. You're not doing this to put down. This is the uplifting. And it's again, as you said, the thing we said before, that our relationship with other people is an analog to our relationship with Allah. And we know when somebody confronts out of a sense of kindness and love. And we know when somebody confronts out of a sense of superiority and putting you down. It does that. They can use, both people can use exactly the same words, exactly the same gestures, and you feel it. It's not a behavioral thing.
I think one of the reasons why I get into a pickle is because I have not learned the ability to shift back as a seer, and I mix it up with overthinking. Like it becomes, so I have to really learn to separate thinking and thought and that kind of rational processing that my mind automatically does.
That's absolutely right.
To be able to be like, which again has to do with that pause that we talked about.
Yeah.
That moment when you feel the agitation, to be able to shift back into...
In the work that we've been doing on you, immediately afterwards, where was the first attribute of discomfort?
Physical discomfort? In the chest, tightness in the chest.
The first, the distinction between the self, one of the things that are true for the distinction between the self and the seer is that they operate from different places on this side. They actually engage the body from different places.
Right.
The self is completely in the head. The self it's that thing of predatory attention we spoke about. His need is trying to get stuff from this completely in the head. The seer operates from here. So when this thing is being enlivened, initially it'll be experienced as a discomfort. Because it's like it's been closed up. I was beginning to relax, So it's to operate from here. And the moment you operate from here, it's not like you go stupid, but you really don't need to think that much. You open yourself up to all sorts of other information that isn't filtered by the noise in your head.
I understand that because I have experience of that as well.
Uh-huh.
Certain matters, I'm very good at
Yeah.
doing it.
Like in your design work.
So, just, sort of piggyback on that. So when something does go wrong, say in your work life or in a relationship, the first thing that happens, or if somebody's giving you a very hard time, the first thing that happens is, personally for me, it all tightens up here. What would be the practice that one would need to do to sort of start utilizing the inward? I mean, what would you say?
So I think it does help to work with it somatically. In other words, work with the physiological experience of this. It's easier to do that than to think yourself out of the problem. Breathing is immensely helpful. And the Wim Hof breathing that I've been trying to convince you to do, you will start breathing better when you start doing that. But really any deliberate working with breath, to breathe deeply, because the moment you do that, it loosens the constriction. I mean, it's the key thing that gets interfered with when we are fearful is our breath. So I mean, there's what is it, 2-4-8 kind of. I mean, there's all sorts of techniques that you can experiment for yourself. But breathe, even if you just deliberately breathe deeply. It has got a special term for it, but which I don't know. But I like to think of it as double clutch breathing. So you breathe in deeply and then you take an extra sip. That quietens you down like this. You even do that before you do any inner work, like you do your salah 3 times before you start. The different quality experience.
So Sheikh Sahab, I've noticed that with these exercises, it helps improve our interactions with people who you might have previously considered as petty tyrants, and now your relationship over time has changed quite a bit because of how you're transforming on the inside. But some petty tyrants are very stubborn,
persistent.
They're very persistent, and it's really hard to get away from thinking in the way where you say to yourself, I know exactly why that person is doing this. I know them so well. I know what's going on in their head. And therefore, of course, you're judging them. And because of that, you're responding in the same way that you would have done before. And then you get frustrated with yourself. You think, why have I not taken that step forward? Why haven't I not improved in this relationship? I thought I was getting better, but it's like a snakes and ladders game. I've just been swallowed up by the snake and I've slid down.
But you'll never slide down to the same level that you were before.
It feels like it.
It doesn't.
In the moment.
It isn't like that. I mean, it feels like it, but it's not like that. You regain your composure a bit more quickly. You can maintain the composure a bit longer. You get and so it's an incremental journey. I mean, it took an immense amount of very clever kind of manipulative engineering to convince you that you're a person. It took like the whole of the community that you were in to collaborate at working with all of these funny little tricks to make you think you're a Hasnain.
Yes.
So you think you're going to get, this is like a one-stop sort of shop to fix. It's not a one-stop shop. Just like we got into our exile by increments, we will get out of our exile by increments. That's part of the joy of the process. It is like it's like sunrise in winter in Scandinavia. Dusk is 2.5 hours. You know, and then when the sun is up, man, is it magnificent. You know, whereas if you're in the tropics, oh, there's the sun. Wasn't there a minute ago? There's the sun. In Scandinavia, man, the sun is something special. So it again comes back to this thing, he wished to be known. So very incrementally, he kind of, it's like a seduction. It lifts up a little bit. Very gradual. Very good. And then, I mean, what is gained is truly gained. It's truly deeply cemented in. You know, it's like. So then, eventually, when you look at this person, you know what's going on in their head, and you have deep compassion for it. And it is like wonderful theatre. You know, it is like you don't even particularly want it to change because it's so entertaining. And if you can help, then you help. And if your help is not required, then please be my guest. I'd like to watch you suffering a bit further.
Right.
So, Lisa, this framework one should be able to apply to any of the issues one faces in the outside and also within oneself. But sometimes, I don't know, maybe it hasn't sunk in, but I'm just not able to do it. So, like if I have a particular issue and I try to use this framework, I'm not able to. So, for instance, if you could just help me, like if one of the other issues I have with myself, which I've just realized in my midlife crisis, is that I'm addicted to stress. So without realizing it, I literally feed off the urgency of the stress that I almost create. It's there, but I feed off it. I can see it. Otherwise, I'm like, I just want to sleep. I have to do this. I have to do that. I need to get this done. And the more it is, it really makes me feel alive, and it's becoming problematic because this is not really good for me to be in that state either. Sometimes I'm like, oh, but literally this is my fuel for the day. Now how do I use this framework to address this issue? Or do I not see it as a problem?
But haven't you just answered yourself?
Have I answered myself?
This is my fuel for the day.
And so have no judgment about that?
Have no judgment about it.
If it's working.
And if it's you know, and then it stops dominating you, and it stops consuming you. It also means that you're more deliberate about it. You can then set the level. How much fuel do I need today? Okay, I need this much fuel. Okay, that's how much I'm going to pump it up. But I'm not going to take it any further. You know, it gives you autonomy in this thing. It no longer defines you. So maybe that which you think is a problem is actually a solution.
So in my head, why is it a problem? Is it because all the information I'm getting about from other sources that define it in a different way? Like somebody called me a cortisol junkie. You know? Yeah, I think.
And it's a label we are using as well now, cortisol detox. And women in their 40s, you know, they need, it's called the busy woman syndrome as well. You need to keep busy. So it's all these labels that have come up recently as well. Yeah.
And it's associated.
But there again, I mean, you know what the response to that should be. What's the appropriate way of dealing with that?
Awareness and
Well, don't make your problem my problem. I mean, if
so if you think being a cortisol junkie is a problem, then that's your problem. Is that
exactly, it's like the fact that I've got egg on my shirt is not my problem, because I can't see the egg on my shirt. Don't make your problem my problem.
That's a tough one. So having the egg on your shirt is not a problem.
Everybody else's problem. I can choose in the spirit of compassion, but it's not a problem to me.
It's how they're perceiving me.
And then you're choosing to clean that egg off for if you are of a sense of compassion. So
You can do that, or you can choose not to.
right.
You see, so we're saying this whole thing is about liberation from being compelled. A liberation from neediness. Now, there's two ways that we are compelled to act in the arena of the perceived. There are two reasons why we are compelled. The first is immediate need for living, for our own survival. And some things associated with greed are like stuff. But there's a whole other thing in there, and that is, and it's far more profound, is that a need to be accepted by. Because we said that the arena of the perceived is by definition a place of contention. You're a self contending with other selves. And there's many of them, and I'm one. So the first strategy you teach your adolescent is, listen, appease them.
Yeah. Yes.
So we spend our life mincing through our lives, like appeasing everybody. Ooh, don't be upset with me. I'm actually very nice. I'm such a nice person. Can't you see I'm a nice person? What must I do to convince you that I'm a nice person? Now, okay. I mean, I can do that, But there's you say, well, then what's the alternative? You say, well, then I'm going to be a bad person. No. Disconnect your experience of being in your own skin from their opinion of you. Recognize that the suffering that you're suffering when they disapprove of you there's a part to this of you deciding to put your hand in the fire.
Isn't the other also supposed to be a mirror? To what extent?
Yes, exactly. That's a very good mirror. It's a very good mirror, but it's not operating like you think it is. That it's a mirror that keeps on. When you engage the other with conditional motive, they will burn you. It will happen. That is how the mirror works. So, the conditional motive you have is their good opinion of you.
Right.
It will burn you.
Right.
That is how the mirror works. And until you stop engaging them with the desire to appease them, they will continue burning you. You will never get their appeasement. They're programmed to do this. They will never finally say yes to you. Particularly not while you need them to say yes to you. They are programmed to read that crack in you and to withhold that affirmation.
That which you're desperately seeking.
And the moment you say, actually, I don't need to suffer this desire for you to like me. My happiness being based on you liking me is a choice. And I choose now not to make my happiness a product of you liking me. Do you know what will happen? They'll like you. That is the most, it is like when you forego the outcome you're trying to manage, it comes to you. When you pursue the outcome, it recedes from you. It is that logic that is the more control you impose, the less control you have. That's the root of this matter. So from every point of view, just, we do ourselves an immense disservice by having a victim narrative. It can just you cannot blame somebody for beating you with cudgels you are putting in their hands.
Cutters.
Cudgels, like whips. Particularly when you put the whip in their hands and you bend over and you give them your backside. And then afterwards you're surprised, but they hurt me. Well, So that metaphor that I really like is a person sitting with their hand in the fire and they're complaining about the awful misery, the pain of this. And you say to them, well, take your hand out of the fire. And they say, no. They're so committed to being who they are. And therefore committed to their suffering. And this is one of those insights that, again, for most of us, maybe there's one person who has the equivalent of a near-death experience, they get sort of axed or something hits them, they've seared all in one. But that's not most of our story. Most of our story is we come out of this thing by increments. It's a thing of practice. The first practice, and you see you're already partly down the way because you now recognize, I need the agitation. I produce the agitation. I'm sure 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you would not have had that insight. You would just have suffered the agitation. That's already a massive growth. To notice that because now the agitation is a phenomenon. It's an object. It's not something that just comes up from behind you and occupies your life. It's also one thing, it's something that's a fantastic rifat, because you're also now in the position of becoming more deliberate about it. You can now start saying, but how much of this anxiety juice do I need to have a good day today, have a productive day today? Well, that's the amount of anxiety juice I'm going to put in the cup. Phew, that's freedom, man. What freedom?
You're asking me what freedom?
Yeah, that is immense freedom, is what I'm saying.
It's freedom if you can step back from it and you can see it and you can control it like you said.
And knowing that not all of it is bad. I think
I think that's it, because I'm like, okay, but I do kind of enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly.
To a certain degree. Until I don't, because it also brings you really.
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword.
So, if I look at the past year, which is 2024, for me that was a year of constriction. Like I chose, everything sort of affected me, and it was literally that feeling constantly. So if I were to break it down, you're right, immediately something happens and start reading, what would you say would be the next few steps that one does?
Well, once one has some kind of degree of no longer being quite so overwhelmed by the somatics of this experience, the physiology of the experience, you can then do the reflective work. And the reflective work is to find the blessing in what's happened.
Right.
To transmute resentment into gratitude.
Right.
And you can use text to do that, as we've said. That's like a journaling skill. It's kind of like, and all the techniques that we've spoken about in PE, personal exits, help you to do that. And with something that's truly important, useful to you, it's not going to be a one-stop fix. It'll be an iterative thing. It'll require sometimes maybe kind of months, years of processing to finally get out of the tyranny of this. And even the length of that is part of the blessing. It's part of the journey. I mean, if we are put into the dark to experience the wonder of the light, then The light is even more wonderful if you've been in the dark for a hell of a long time.